go. Well, it's time for our paper review. Ben is joining us in anticipation. Well, let's take a look at what's making the headlines around the world. We're going to start with the story that is continuing to absolutely dominate the papers and online. And it's, of course, the fallout from Charlottesville. The Guardian bears the headline, "Trump under fire from all sides as woman dies at far-right rally." Now, the article says that the president fails to blame white supremacists.
On the front page of the Financial Times, Brussels seeks tighter vetting of takeovers to ease fears over China. The article claims there are calls for more rigorous screening of foreign takeovers of European companies amid concerns at the surge of Chinese investment into high-tech manufacturing, energy and the infrastructure sectors.
The Times highlights a 50% rise in arrests of drunken airline passengers. An investigation also found that cabin crew described being groped, abused and physically assaulted by inebriated passengers.
Chile's energy transformation is the headline for the international edition of the New York Times, with a look at South America's first geothermal energy plant. According to the article, Chilean officials believe they're on track to rely on clean sources for 90% of the country's electricity by the year 2050.
And the front of the Straits Times, a sad end to Usain Bolt's career. The 30-year-old Jamaican tumbling after pulling a hamstring in his final race. The paper claims that some sprinters blame event organisers at the World Championships in London after athletes were forced to wait in a cold, air-conditioned room for nearly 40 minutes before the relay. I tell you what, we get loads of drama from the athletics championships. It's incredible, isn't it? Let us begin. We are joined by Kulveer Ranger, the Vice President of Strategy and Communications for Atos. We will come to the athletics shortly, but let's of course start with The Guardian. And as The Guardian described, the Trump under fire, he just simply didn't put the blame on the white supremacists that attended this particular rally.
No, he hasn't. And good morning, Kasia. Good morning, Ben. I think the challenge here is that over the last couple of days, as these terrible events have unfolded in Charlottesville, the President of the United States has not been clear enough in his condemnation of the far right, of these extremists. And in fact, he's had some ambiguous language around it, which a lot of people have latched onto on either sides. When he's actually used that phrase, that there is challenges on either side, on all sides. And people have taken that to say, well, surely there is a side here. There's a side that's the neo-Nazi, white extremist, Ku Klux Klan. And then there's those people fighting against that kind of horrible, disgraceful feelings and rhetoric that shouldn't really be allowed to be supported in any way, shape or form from the leader of America, or given any ambiguity about his views on it. I think that's what's led to all this concern, apart from the demonstration, the largest of its kind for decades in the United States. His language has been the problem. And I've looked at some of his tweets this morning over the last 24 hours. And despite the fact that it reads a bit like a Hallmark card, and he's actually said best regards to the people of Charlottesville. And he has sent his condolences to the tragedy of the young lady who's been killed there. You know, Trump seems to have a problem with communication, not the directness of it, where Twitter he uses, but really how he gets his message across.
Although the White House has since clarified, haven't they? They said that the president does condemn what went on, and they've sort of sought to kind of respond to these criticisms. But I wonder if it's all a bit after the event, a little bit too late.
Yeah, you're right, Ben. But, you know, why does the White House need to clarify on behalf of a man who seems to have no problem at all to putting out his view in 140 characters or less about what he feels? So therein lies the problem, that the White House is having to clarify the president's view on something that, dare I say it, should be extremely black or white. Now, you know, the president, as I read here, is on a 17-day working vacation at his golf resort in Bedminster. So obviously he's got lots on his mind at the moment, apart from this thing that's tearing apart America. And it can be, you know, a moment that America's always bordered on this racial tension between this kind of underlying issue. You need a strong president at times like this, and he needs to sort of get out there and not have the White House clarify for himself his view, but he himself put the market out. And
it always seems that there's a second spokesperson. Ivanka Trump is the person that is directly criticising rather than him.
Yes. And, you know, a lot of people have criticised her role as an aide to him in the White House, but if she can bring some reason and sense, then maybe we need to applaud her at this point.
Kulveer, I just want to move on to the Financial Times. Brussels looking to tighten up the vetting of Chinese takeovers of European companies. It's all very well, and I can understand why they may want to do this. But if it's the world's second largest economy, you can't really say no to their money, can you?
You can't, but there's been this ongoing challenge with the EU, and interesting here with the EU trying to re-exert itself as a force on the geopolitical world after all the challenges it has as its own navel gazing, and then we in the UK look at Brexit and the challenges within the EU. What the EU should do is look how Europe plays a part in those global markets with the US, with the Far East, India, China. Now, there's been a number of concerns about Chinese companies and also their close involvement with the state in China and how that reflects in terms of some of the things, their strategies and their drivers as they expand overseas. But I think there's that balance between protectionism and the free market. And I think that's the line that the EU has to walk. And it still has pushback. A number of countries in the EU, especially the Nordic countries, Portugal, Spain, as we read here in the FT, have always pushed back against too much control from a central EU about who they can and cannot do business with. And I think there's that fine line that needs to be walked here.
The United States is already doing it, though, isn't it? They're looking after themselves already.
They are. And again, it's that America first strategy. It's very much, a bit protectionism about their home markets. But in a globalised world, in a world where people want the best technology and where we want to be at the cutting edge, where we want the jobs, the innovation, I think there's that balance that does need to be struck.
We're talking about a globalised world. We've got the Times. We obviously travel a lot, and we've got the Times now talking about this. The arrest of drunken passengers up by 50%. It's staggering.
I've seen this story, and I have a number of questions around it. We all probably travel. Unlike you fine people, I have to travel cattle class a lot nowadays.
I'm always back of the plane.
Airlines have treated us like cattle, squeezing us in, getting us into these tiny spaces. And if you go to an airport nowadays, there seems to be more bars, more places where drinks can be had. You're stuck there for a lot longer. You have to be there for hours in advance. It is quite stressful flying nowadays. The amount of queues, yes, I understand the security reasons, but there's a lot of pressure on people as they're travelling. I'm not excusing this. I think what needs to be looked at here is which routes, which airlines, which airports, because I get the feeling this may be quite a specific group, and it does need to be looked at. We should not have this kind of behaviour on airlines or in airports, especially in terms of how it puts people's lives at risk, and just the common decency of it, But I do see the other side of it, which is people are being, treated like cattle, and they're almost there, told to be there for hours in these heated, overcrowded airports waiting for delayed flights.
Very diplomatic of you, isn't that, Kulveer? Very diplomatic of you, because it's Panorama investigation. We'll have to wait for that to see it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Yeah. Let's take a look at the New York Times briefly. Chile looking to perhaps achieve 90% clean energy by 2050. So important if the world's moving towards things like diesel, away from diesel and petrol cars towards electric cars, this sort of clean energy is going to be so important.
This is great news. I think this is fantastic, and it's not just Chile, it's the whole of South America that's been really leading on climate change, and the efforts that they've put in to transform their infrastructure, to bring in, utilise their national assets. They've always had a lot of hydroelectric power with the dams that they've got there, obviously with the volcanoes, the mountain ranges, the thermal springs. This enables them to have really good natural assets that they can leverage, and they've been making the most of it. And that ambition, where they are at the moment, 45% of their power is currently clean, green energy, and they're looking to get that to 90% by 2050. Again, I want to say, here's Chile in South America and the rest of the world. And here it appears is Donald Trump saying, no, we're not going to go into the... they seem quite downbeat about what he's doing around the Paris Accord agreement and not looking at climate change. So, again, other countries picking up the baton and running with the things that matter to people.
Kulveer, we're going to have to sprint to the finish. Pardon the pun. Terrible. Terrible. It's the worst one you'll hear this morning, probably all week. Usain Bolt, what a sad end to the career, and now we might know why.
Well, I think this is a bit of athletes tittle-tattle. There's some story about athletes being in an air-conditioned room before this relay race that, unfortunately, the great Usain Bolt, collapsed in a heap. But I want to say this. We saw some great performances over the last 10 days in the London Stadium in the UK. The IAF World Championships are fantastic. a new era of athletes entered the stage, and unfortunately, the legends do have to exit at some point, and they exit with dignity. So Mo Farah, Usain Bolt, and many others did a fantastic job for a decade, and now it's the others.
Kulveer Ranger, you have been a legend here tonight, to this morning, even on the papers. Thank you so much for joining us, Kulveer Ranger and Ben Bland.
Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Bye bye.